serious, have you ever suffered with something you didn't know was a medical condition until a doctor told you what happened? Story 1. Since I was a young kid, I'd seen things that didn't exist and hear things that weren't actually there. I'd constantly be hearing my name from places like inside the sink and other stupid stuff. I'd always have conversations with myself, but not like a talking to yourself kind of thing, but like between two or more totally different consciousnesses. My thoughts were sporadic and would come rapid fire and out of order, and that was really the only part that made things difficult for me. I'd never told anyone about these things because all the time people told me that everyone was different and brains all work differently. So I didn't think much of it. So fast forward to 2 summers ago, I get all suicidal and depressed in typical teenage fashion, and my parents, being caring and stuff, send me to the hospital. The hospital people redirect me to the psychiatric ward. I end up in a locked psychiatric ward talking to psychiatrists and therapists and social workers and everything of the like. Turns out I'm a disorganized schizophrenic, and I have like really bad anxiety. So like they give me a prescription for some antipsychotic called Risperdal, which is now proven to stimulate breast growth in men, I'm a man, and some high-strength anxiety medication. After like a week and a half in this locked psychiatric unit, they decide they've doctored me enough, and they send me out with my new pills and whatever. The antipsychotic takes away all those conversations I used to have in my head. I didn't really have any friends, so basically I was nightly taking a pill to kill everyone I love. It was horrid. It also had this weird disassociation effect where I felt like I wasn't the one feeling all my emotions. It was weird. The anxiety medication accidentally helped me with organizing my thoughts, but I was still always super anxious. Eventually I gave up taking the Risperdal because of how awful it made me feel, and I told the psychiatrist of how ignorant it was to prescribe that because it took away any comforts I had and such. And he said that all these thoughts were coming from a side effect from the anxiety medication. He took it away. I now take no medication despite being fairly mentally ill. And now I feel like a freak among normal humans. I've lost all trust one ever had with doctors, and I forever regret telling them everything. If you read all this, thank you. I've never really poured out my feelings like this. Story 2. I thought every kid had joint pain. I thought everyone was sensitive to the sun. I thought everyone was tired all the time. And I thought everyone got sick a lot. Turns out I had lupus. So yes, sometimes it is lupus. Story 3. So I'm a 30-year-old female. When I hit puberty and got my first period, I had normal periods for about a year, and then suddenly they got abnormal. As in I would get them every other month. I mentioned this to my doctor, and he said it was normal for teenage girls to have unusual cycles, and that it could take years to get normal. So I figure okay and go on with life. And my weird periods, fast forward about 15 years, and I'm 27, married, and trying to get pregnant. Mind you, my periods never got normal. One year, I only had it about 3 times, and the solution was to put me on birth control to force my body to have regular periods. I take BC for years, until age 27. When I get pregnant, I stop taking BC, and bam, no periods. The same time I go off birth control, I suddenly start to suffer from severe anxiety, panic attacks, depression, headaches, and just feeling shitty all the time. I go to see my gynecologist and tell her what's up, and she decides to do a blood test. Blood results come back, and it turns out I have a tumor on my pituitary gland. MRI confirms it. I've had this tumor since puberty, and is why I've had irregular periods, anxiety, and all-around feeling crappy. It has also made me infertile. I take medication to help reduce the size of the tumor, and so far it has helped with the anxiety and headaches. The diagnosis blindsided me, and it was very hard to deal with. I'm okay now, and have accepted it, and the infertility it comes with. Story 4. I had an ectopic third ureter for the first nearly 21 years of my life. I knew that there was something wrong with me, but had no idea what it could possibly be. I just knew that I essentially peed my pants 247. I always had to wear pull-ups until I outgrew those, and then I had to use pads every day to keep myself dry. I could never understand how other kids could wear regular underwear all the time and not be incredibly uncomfortable. I was very adapted to my condition and had a relatively normal childhood, and it wasn't until I got older that I became painfully aware of how different I was. I went in for my first pelvic exam when I was 20 and warned my doctor that he might see some leakage when he went to check things out. The actual exam was normal, but he sent me to a urologist to get to the bottom of my other issue, but not before warning me that it might be neurological and therefore they wouldn't be able to do anything. So I go to see a urologist, who happened to be the same urologist I had seen when I was younger for a different issue with my urinary tract chronic kidney infections. He did some imaging tests and was quite surprised to find that I had a third ureter and deduced, based on my symptoms, that the ureter inserted into the vaginal wall instead of my bladder. Hence the reason why I was absolutely unable to stop any urine from leaking out. There are no sphincters up there. I ended up having surgery to remove part of my kidney, a far easier cure than removing the entire ureter, and I haven't had any problems since. My life is absolutely normal now, although as a consequence I feel compelled to own hundreds of pairs of pretty underwear since I couldn't have nice ones growing up. Edit words. Also, this issue made my life vastly more complicated than I could ever describe here, but I'm not sure I would take it back if I could. I ended up being a much stronger and more independent person than I think I ever would have been otherwise. Story 5. I, for a few years, had severe heartburn, but I suffered through it. Baking soda and Tums became my best friends. After about 2 years, a new trend starts. My chest begins to hurt, usually after meals, and it just gets worse soon. I feel bloated constantly, and I start losing my appetite. I ended in the hospital a few days before Christmas. This was back in 2012, because I hadn't eaten for 3 days and finally vomited up what I had for supper 3 days prior. Not to mention it felt like a monkey was using my heart for jungle gym. ER nurses basically laugh at me and say I have gastroparesis and acid reflux. Gastroparesis is when your stomach fails to empty its contents when there is no blockage present. The nurses pat me on the head and say there is nothing they can do. Oh wait, lose weight was an option and to basically get over it, and give me useless antacids. Fast forward about 4 months after that endeavor to the ER, and my sister is now on a health kick. She wants to go dairy-free and gluten for a week. Being the supportive big brother, I am decide to help her out and join her. After a week on this diet, it was as if I never even had any gastrointestinal issues to speak of. After a week of no wheat and no dairy, it was night and day. So, and needless to say, I found out I grew into a lactose intolerance and wheat intolerance. Story 6. When I was really little, I think up until 2nd grade, I threw up a lot. I had been taken to the doctor a few times, but he never thought it anything serious. One day it got so bad that my mom took me to the ER, and after some tests, it turns out I have this thing in my small intestine called a Meckel's diverticulum. I'm not too sure about the details myself, but I think it was basically a tumor-like growth in my stomach that caused me to be sick whenever I ate. One surgery later, I can eat without throwing up, and now I'm happily overweight instead of too skinny. Story 7. I got this rash during finals week when I was 20. I had back pains that I thought I got from flipping around on a trampoline. Turns out I had shingles. Story 8. When I was a child, I had a full head of pure white hair, which was completely out of control. I couldn't do anything with it, and it just stuck out at any old angle from my head. As I grew older, I began shaving my head as I had no control over my hairstyle. I went to visit the family doctor for another matter, and he commented that shaving my head was a novel way of dealing with my uncombable hair syndrome. I just laughed it off and thought no more of it. FF 20-odd years, and the internet tells me that it is a real syndrome. Story 9. Since I was 12 or 13, I'm 38 now. I had problems with abdominal pain and stool. When I told my doctor, he said there's a test that could look up your bum, but a nice girl wouldn't want to have that done. I was a nice girl. So, of course, I said everything was fine. A few years later, it was bad enough. I went to another doctor. His brilliant diagnosis: you're engaged to be married. It's just anxiety about having. I didn't have the heart to tell him I'd been living with myself for over a year. Went to the local emergency room and almost ended up in a psych ward for 72 hours. They had a bad habit of involuntarily committing young women. A friend nearly died from not getting her kidney infection treated during her 72-hour hold. Moved away for university and got spectacularly ill. Went to the hospital in the new city, and the resident who was taking my history casually said, "How long have you Crohn's disease?" Turns out he was right. TLDR. Spent over 5 years being told I was nuts. Turns out I had a real medical condition. Story 10. My sister was concerned about some small lumps on her tongue and went to the doctor. She was really quite worried as he looked in her mouth, humming and hawing. The doctor diagnosed her as having taste buds. Apparently hers are just particularly visible, and her tongue comes out further than most people, so they're more noticeable than most. Story 11. My SO's dad always had doctors complain his heartbeat was too quiet. FF till he's around 52 or so. Needs open heart surgery because he refused for years to go to the doctor because they complain about his heart too much. The doctors were surprised to find his heart on the right side and backwards. Story 12. When I was in graduate school 2009, I decided that summer was coming and I wanted to try something new and completely shave my head. However, being the vain person that I am and seeing too many people that shave their heads and have weird misshapen heads, I was trying to feel my head to see if it was perfectly shaped before it was uncovered for all to see. During one of these examinations, I found a very wide, almost flat bulge under the skin, but it was not bony, it was squishy. I went to the doctor, and he referred me to a surgeon, thinking it was a cyst. Surgeon thought it was just a skin infection and puts me through 3 rounds of antibiotics. before he finally gives up and cuts it open. He told me it wasn't a cyst and sent a biopsy out for testing. 4 labs, and 3 weeks later, I'm still calling because I haven't heard everything. I call one day while I was on break at work, and the nurse tells me to come in ASAP, but the test came back lymphoma, huge breach of protocol there. Never tell someone they have cancer over the phone when they're not expecting it. I literally shut down everything I was doing that day and just went home and laid in bed. My grandmother had died of lymphoma 2 months before that. After my treatments, a host of issues that were nagging, but not worth go to the doctor about went away. Night sweats, joint pain, other immune issues, got treated for that. Went into remission, relapsed in 2012, but am in remission again thanks to some newer therapies. TLDR vanity over having a pretty head reveals that I have cancer. Have gotten rid of it twice now. Story 13, endometriosis. I know periods were bad and cramps were normal. I didn't know that cramps shouldn't be so debilitating that you stay home from school for a week. I also had more mild cramps that would come and go regularly regardless of the time of month. It was embarrassing being 13 and buying hormonal birth control to help, but I'm just glad I don't live in a religious place. Story 14, I had and just recovered from pudendal neuropathy, which to me was severe testicular pain. I've been kicked in the nuts that hadn't hurt this bad, and was at the point I was asking them to just take the testicle. It took 6 months to diagnose it because no doctor could find anything wrong, and no doctor I talked to since has ever heard of it. It took finding a specialist at Rush University to diagnose it and fix it. Apparently only 2 doctors in the country performed the surgery that was done on me. The doctor described it as the nerve had been turned on and wouldn't turn off. So basically it was sending a constant stream of pain that got worse and worse through my testicles for 7 months. 4 ER visits, months of pain meds, and a surgery later. I'm all better. I didn't really know nerves could be turned on. TLDR, severe ball pain because my nerve refused to turn off. Edit. For those curious, my symptoms will be the pain was always worse when sitting or laying down. All tests that were done for me came back clear and showing no anomalies, and my symptoms were opposite of anything any urologist had ever seen. The surgery was basically removing my nerves from the testicle and burning them to permanently destroy them. I actually cannot feel the left side on my groin at all anymore. Story 15, when I was a teenager, I had an extreme pain in my heel that would make me limp, which lasted for over 3 years. I went to the school doctors, and he said I was pulling a muscle. I get ridiculed for faking an injury, which has lasted this long. Now fast forward, I go to a new school. The pain is still as bad as ever. The PE teacher thinks this is very strange and has seen the same symptoms before. Go to see the new school doctor and is diagnosed with Achilles tendonitis. This is when the bones grow too fast for the tendon in the heel, and the joint between tissue and bone is torn. Any running I tried was, in fact, making it worse and wouldn't heal. I started physiotherapy 3 times a week, and it completely heals in 2 years. I was called Achilles fakeritis, as the other kids thought I was faking again. TLDR had undiagnosed Achilles tendonitis for 3 years, and was in a lot of pain and limped when walking. Even saw a doctor which dismissed it as a pulled muscle. Took 2 years of physiotherapy to run again with no pain. Story 16, for about 5 years as a teenager, I would have random severe abdominal pain that would last 7 to 15 days. Ultrasound would turn up inconclusive. Nurses would constantly insist that I might be pregnant despite not being active. Aside from severe pain, there were no other severe symptoms that I could report. My doctor kept telling me that I was experiencing growing pains and to take a few ibuprofen, which did nothing. It wasn't until I left pediatrics and had my first gyno visit, I had my blood drawn, asked questions about my overall health, weight, hair growth, menstrual cycle, and it was quickly assessed that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome (PCOS). The diagnosis hasn't radically changed my life, but I experience a lot less fear knowing that I will be taken seriously when I express the pain and nausea, at times shock, that I am experiencing. Story 17, I remember freaking out the first time I had a panic attack. I generally, though my heart had stopped or was about to explode or something, my mom thought I was faking an illness, and in all fairness, something I need a lot to get out of school. I saw my psychologist the next day, and she explained, also being told that thinking about killing yourself every day wasn't normal. I honestly thought that was something everyone did, but telling school nurses, doctors, etc., they were always really shocked and were sure it wasn't normal. Also being told that school phobia was a real thing. My parents were sure it wasn't a real thing, but all the health works said they believed it was a real phobia lots of people had. Story 18, not exactly serious, but tinnitus, I've had it as long as I can remember. When I was a kid, I probably thought it was normal for that reason. It also made it really obnoxious to try and go to sleep without being exhausted. When there's very little sound, the ringing would intensify until I moved or shifted and made noise. Fast forward to high school, when I go to a concert, A few days later, I'm talking to my friends about the show, and they were complaining about their ears still ringing from the show opening acts don't get a sound check. High on Fire just puts everything to 11 and goes ham. I was puzzled at the fact that they thought ringing in their ears was strange. So I thought they were with me. They thought I was high for thinking that it was normal. Doctor said that there's not much I could do about it except for ambient noise. White noise machine actually does help, and the fan from my computer makes a good supplement. Story 19, I did some volunteer work for school unloading pumpkins for a church thing. Pumpkins are heavy, and it started raining. They said we could still work in the rain. I was pushing a wheelbarrow with no stand thingy in the back, and it started tipping to the side. I slipped a little, and in an effort to make it not fall on me, I pushed it really hard to the side. It fell, but so did I hard. My back hurt really bad, and I thought I just had some bruising. So I waited it out. It was winter, and the pain kept getting worse and worse with the cold, and it started to spread. Months passed. I kept thinking it was because I had bad posture that was catching up to me. There was no way it could still be from the pumpkin thing, right? The pain got to the point where I started walking with a limp because it began spreading down my leg. Finally went to the doctor. It was sciatica. Nerve that runs down your spine was messed up. No cure, just pills. Pills weren't enough, and I got some nasty side effects, so I stopped taking them after my health insurance ran out. So I've just been dealing with the pain for a few years. It's all right most days. Some days it's unbearable. Family keeps telling me to man up, that it's all in my head. I wouldn't wish extreme sciatic pain on anybody. I feel like an old lady in a 20-year-old body. Story 20, this isn't quite a doctor, but I found out a month or so ago from an AskReddit that I have exploding head syndrome. Essentially, every so often, just as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear the loudest noise imaginable. It's low and trails off slowly. Basically, it's like an old cannonball shot. Strange thing is it's the loudest sound, but it doesn't hurt as it's not actually happening, rather an auditory hallucination. Story 21, when I was 16, I had spontaneous pneumothorax. I was at a youth center playing pool, and I felt really short of breath suddenly, and there was a very sharp pain in my chest. I called my parents to come get me, and after a while at home, we went to the hospital. Turns out my lung had collapsed. Spontaneous pneumothorax is when your lung collapses for no reason at all. There are things that could lead to it, such as smoking, which I didn't, or being tall, which I am, but ultimately it can happen to anyone. Story 22, I was always tired and losing weight. I thought it was just the stress of finals, but it was actually because I had thalassemia minor. I always knew I had anemia, but it never really bothered me much before, aside from my bad habit of always eating ice and having a cold nose. I got on a regular iron pill, and I gained back all of my energy. Not gaining weight, but I've always been underweight anyway. Good thing I found out, though, it was extremely frustrating always being tired and passing out like 3 times a day. Story 23, I've always been a lazy person. Naps were my favorite activity. Senior year of high school, I started getting worse. I could not wake up to class, and if I did, I'd sleep until recess. Wake up, eat, sleep until classes ended. By the end of the year, I went to the doctor, and we found out I had hypothyroidism, the type that is caused by an autoimmune disease, and my thyroid was barely functioning at all, being under medication since then. Fast forward to this year, and I am 25. I've been having a lot of problems adjusting. Guys, problems, a lot of things I've never had to deal with before. I go back home for winter break, and I haven't been home for a whole year. I don't want to live in my bed. I ignore my friends' calls, and I'm starting to realize I might be depressed. I've always been a social person. My friends start getting mad at me for bailing and not showing up to events, and that just makes me want to hide even more. Last year I had struggles, but would always think it was related to school. Now I'm realizing it was not. Go to the doctor for the annual checkup, and my thyroid medicine was not handling my condition well. My levels are all messed up, and the medicine will be increased on top of that. My D vitamin levels were almost 10, normal being 70. I basically had depression from lack of vitamin D, and am now on supplements to revert the situation. Story 24, when I was 5, I was active enough that I climbed to the top of a waterfall in Yosemite, which was a fair bit of a trail. However, I started going downhill not long after that. I got less and less active as it got harder and harder to be active. I played sports, but I was increasingly clearly out of shape. I found it painful to try to ride a bike and had no endurance. By the end of elementary school, my mom was yelling at me for walking funny, and I would wear out the inner side of shoes first, since when I walk, my ankle would be nearly on the ground. Turns out there's a misalignment in the bones of my feet, so I wasn't using the right muscles to walk, which meant walking, running, etc. were really difficult. I got some corrective inserts made out of hard plastic and had surgery on one of my feet my first year of high school, although I've never been able to have the surgery on the other foot. Today, when I step out of the shower, I see 2 different footprints. The foot that had surgery has the heel and toes and the clear indications of the arch. The other foot is a perfect outline of my foot flattened, with the inside of that footprint being a straight line from my big toe back to my heel. Story 25, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Severe pain everywhere. Thought I was going to die because it was cancer or something. It was a relief to know I wasn't dying, but sucked because it's lifelong and no cure. Not to mention the medications they try to put you on are terrible. It brings me down sometimes, but I have my life. Remember being like, oh, that's not too bad, until I got home and researched it. The doctor didn't even explain it, just handed me a script for Cymbalta and said, see you next month. Story 26, I had anemia, and I would become dizzy, and during the time Aunt Flo came to town, I'd be 3 times as dizzy and pass out sometimes. I figured it was just side affects of being a woman, but then finally on of those times it had gotten bad. I felt super cold, I lost my appetite, so I wasn't eating like I should have, and I was losing too much blood, and I passed out and went to the ER and found out that night. It was crazy, and I was suffering from that for a while before it reached that point. Story 27, ADHD, primarily inattentive. Who'da thought? You can have ADHD without being hyper at all. Went through all of grade school with it and didn't find out until college when I decided to get checked with a school psychologist. Always just thought the problems I had were normal. Story 28, when I was 17, my mother thought I slept a lot more than normal, and I was always pretty tired, so we got some tests done. Turns out I'm highly gluten intolerant along with a long list of other things: milk, eggs, coffee, garlic, certain fish, ECT. My doctor said I had the blood organ function of a 70-year-old. That along with other unusual problems for my age, such as bad joints, excessive tiredness, loose poops, weight gain, and painful bloating, I had hypothyroidism and a moderate case of malnutrition, since my intestines were in such bad shape. I was so used to the pain and used to eating that food my body was bogged down and couldn't even react. Though as I got better, my reactions got worse, and I would become immobile while it felt like I was digesting knives. Years later, I have turned it all the way around and am healthy. So glad I got it checked out. I thought everyone always felt kind of crappy after they ate and that I was super lazy. Turns out I am a bit of procrastinator, even healthy. Story 29, when I grew up, other kids, even in high school, would comment on my heavy breathing. I was always out of breath during any exercise and climbing stairs. When I was 21, I lived near a tunnel outlet and couldn't sleep because I couldn't breathe. Went to my doctor of many years and complained. His response, you have asthma. Excuse me. He repeats and gives me prescriptions for 3 different inhalers. I grew up in a household with always at least 3 dogs, sometimes 5, puppies every year, and parents that didn't mind if the house was spotless or not. To say the least, in one meeting with the doctor, my entire out-of-break life explained, mind blown. Story 30, I never realized my hands and feet constantly feeling cold and numb during autumn-spring was a medical condition until I found it in a textbook in the first year of my medical degree. It's called Raynaud's phenomena. Thankfully, I can take medication when it gets really bad, so I can still play instruments and write, as it slows your ability to move your fingers precisely. Story 31, yes. Waterhouse-Friderichsen syndrome. It is a bilateral hemorrhage from your adrenal glands. If people survive, they often recover some function, but mine hemorrhaged so profusely that they were toast. So, now, I have primary adrenal insufficiency, and I get to take tons of pills like corticosteroids and things to keep my blood pressure up and some other stuff or I will die. Edit happy fingers a word. Story 32, minor scoliosis. I've always had back pains, but I just figured it was growing pains, just me being tall. I mentioned my arm was in consistent pain to a doctor because I was worried about carpal tunnel. She had me touch my toes, looked at my back, and informed me I had scoliosis. Naturally, I thought of some pretty horrible stuff. I'd always assumed scoliosis meant your back was growing in a 90-degree angle and you had to strap yourself in a brace to save yourself. The doctor calmly explained to me that I had a benign kink in my upper back that probably developed sometime during one of my growth spurts. It wouldn't get any worse, I just had to watch my back and not overexert myself. I also didn't realize my intense times of the month actually were a medical condition and not just normal times of the month. I can't remember the name, but it's essentially period fuckia. I take BC to handle it now. Thank goodness for that. Story 33, found out I have paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. I had experienced episodes of it before and didn't really think anything of it, but one day when I was studying cardiology for my EMT class, it occurred again. Right when I was reading about AFib, looked at the symptoms and thought, holy shit, that's exactly what's going on. Story 34, burning mouth syndrome. Every so often when I eat, the roof off my mouth feels like it's on fire. Anything that touches it hurts and feels tender and swollen. At first I thought it was an allergic reaction, but it wasn't happening with any specific food. Finally, I asked my doctor about it. There's no real cure, but eating yogurt can help. Also, it gets worse and more painful if I go an extended period of time without eating. Story 35, I realized recently that I have visual snow. It basically means your vision constantly kind of looks like a snowy television or a noisy photograph. I thought everyone's was like it. Story 36. When I was a little kid, my parents homeschooled me. While I often complained about bad stomach aches, to the point where it was just about every day I'd get a stomach ache and really not want to do school or anything, parents never believed me and always gave me so much for being lazy and lying and trying to get out of school. A few years later, they finally took me to a doctor where it was discovered that I had a bad peptic ulcer in my stomach. I got a serious regimen of antibiotics and heartburn medication, and 10 years of I told you so, giving me a free pass to actually lie about feeling too bad to go to school. As a bonus, during the time I was suffering from this ulcer, my family and a bunch of other families working as missionaries got to go to a beach resort for a week-long conference. Every single person there got food poisoning, except for me, because my stomach hurt too much to eat. Story 37. During the summer of when I was 11, my family went to a wedding out in Vancouver and decided to rent an RV. We packaged it up with a wild bunch of regular camping junk food, so we had all the sugary drinks and sugary food the kid could ask for. This began the worst summer of my life. I did not know at the time, but I had made the final stretch into type 1 diabetes. I lost a significant amount of weight, 25 pounds, but no one thought anything of it because I had grown 4 inches over the course of the year. During the school year, I had regular pee times and would always need to go and get a drink. So near the end of the year, she would just let me leave class without asking. So the 2 weeks is rolling by, and I am every hour and shitting just liquids, or I am so horribly constipated that I would just lock myself in the washroom and sit there with a book for most of the day, which helped cause I could just keep on. Once we get back home, I start sleeping during all points of the day and being awake for about 5 hours each day in total, but I would never feel rested, and I would always wake up begging for water. I remember asking my dad what it could be because I knew that there was something wrong, and he said, well, Pyrojet, it could be diabetes, but don't worry, it isn't just some minor thing that we will get checked out. This conjured up images of the fat diabetic girl who would always cry at lunch and eat weird foods. And so I was horrified because being a little kid, I had no idea about the facts. The day I was admitted to hospital was probably the best day, though, because I finally had answers to what was going on. I had been eating some Jell-O and just passed out in the kitchen. My dad saw me lying there and picked me up in his arms, put me in the car, and drove off with my mom to the adult hospital. I woke up in this blue room with this doctor standing over me telling me, Pyrojet, you have diabetes, and all I could say was, darn, well, that sucks. And then I passed out again. I kept waking up every 20 minutes because they were moving me. My parents had brought me to the adult hospital. I got to ride in an ambulance, and all I remember is being so thirsty lying there strapped down and seeing this nurse drinking one of those small apple juice containers, and I just looked at her with so much longing that she just ended up throwing the thing away with all the juice still in there. After that, I woke up again with needles in my veins, and I think I soiled myself. Now, I have managed it for the last 9 years, and I would not change it for anything in the world. It has done so much for me that I cannot look at it as this thing that stops me from doing things, just makes me try harder to achieve. It is how I keep raising the bar, and for some reason girls love asking me about. So that is a bonus, I guess. TLDR, got diabetes over the summer. Story 38. Around last year, my right, I started seeing double. I wear glasses, so I thought my eyes were just being weird and it would go away. It kind of got worse, but I ignored it. Luckily, my optometrist sent me to get checked for keratoconus. It's a condition in which your cornea turns into a cone shape like a football. Sadly, no surgery to fix it other than a cornea transplant, which they only do if it's severe. There's surgery that stops it from getting worse, which I'm considering. At least I can wear hard contacts and my vision then becomes good again, but no LASIK for me. Story 39. Not terribly pleasant, but from when I was a child, I had a fairly low pressure when peeing, not something I readily chatted people about. So I never knew it was odd. After a couple of closely spaced UTIs in my late 20s, went to a doc and had to have minor surgery to fix it, although I don't really consider penis scalpel in any way minor. Had to have a catheter in for 10 days. Not fun, but I pee like a racehorse now. Story 40. When I was maybe 12 or so, I developed this small itchy patch of skin on the back of my neck. It never went away, but sometimes it would be really itchy, and sometimes I wouldn't notice it at all. This went on until I turned 21, and over time the patch had spread until it stretched nearly across the hairline on the back of my neck and moved up a couple inches into my scalp. I was becoming more stressed out, and that seemed to irritate my skin, so I scratched more and more until it hurt too much to bear. Went to the doctor, had like 3 people stare at the back of my neck and head saying, oh wow, this is interesting, and then I was told I had psoriasis, got prescriptions for special skin cream and oil for my scalp, and I'm happy as a clam. I never really mentioned anything to my parents about my skin until recently because frankly I never noticed it, or it just didn't bother me as bad as it does now. In hindsight, also I'm sure I thought I was just stressing out from the bullies, and that was what made my skin so irritated. In fact, when I happen to be under a lot of pressure, it'll feel that area of skin begin to itch, even though I've been treating it for a year now. Psoriasis. A child of many problems, was really terrible with people. Ever since I was a little kid, I didn't work well with other people, and a lot of times I got in fights and was picked on. Moved quickly to third grade, the problem got worse, and I was sent to the principal a lot. I then got many tests done by psychiatrists, and they told me, oh, it's just ADHD, so they put me on medications. After 2 weeks of major stomach pain, I was taken off it. Jumped to fifth grade, and I went again for anger issues. After a proper test, they said I have Asperger's syndrome, which for me made my whole life make sense. They said I will eventually get better. Skip to now, and still going socially not strong. I have some friends, but I end up being left out of things a lot and made fun of for being weird, but I'm happy about it. Due to me having Asperger's, I am amazing at three-dimensional thinking and am willing to take my burden.